Hi guys, so Wednesday was another day for PMQs, Boris Johnson versus Keir Starmer, so let's hear what they had to say.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 months ago today, the Prime Minister said, test and trace can be a real game changer for us. He was backed up by the Health Secretary, who said, finding where people who test positive are is the single most important thing that we can do to stop the spread of the virus. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said the complete opposite. Standing there, he said testing and tracing has very little or nothing to do with the spread or transmission of the disease. Both positions cannot be right. Which one is it, Prime Minister?
So why did Boris Johnson do this? Boris Johnson, yes, back at the beginning of the pandemic said, test and trace is really important. NHS test and trace is working. We've invested a lot in it. He didn't mention that there were private companies actually doing the tracing and in many cases the testing as well. And when there was actually testing being carried out by the NHS itself, it was actually producing better results than the private companies were. But let's park that for a moment. Now that it's not actually working, now that people are not able to get access to tests and many people are not being traced after they come forward and get tested and result as positive, the government are completely changing direction again. It's like, no, it's not testing we need to do, it's something else.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is an obvious fact of biology and epidemiology that, alas, this disease is transmitted by human contact or aerosol contact, but it is one of the great advantages of NHS test and trace, which we did not have working, alas, earlier in the pandemic. We simply didn't have it in the spring, and the result is that we now have the ability to see in granular detail where the epidemic is breaking out, exactly which groups are being infected. That's why we've been able to deliver the local lockdowns, and that's why we're able to tell now at this stage that it is necessary to take the decisive action that we are, and which I think he supports, or he did yesterday anyway, to drive the virus down, keep kids in school and keep our economy moving. That's the point, Mr. Speaker.
Did Boris Johnson actually answer a point there? He talked around the actual issue that Keir Starmer raised. And of course, Boris Johnson has his typical go-to arguments, go-to points to make. So first of all, he generally attacks the questioner. He hasn't done it on this occasion, but he generally attacks the questioner, avoids the actual question, and then at the end asks for unity. But, come along with me. Let's not be enemies. Let's be friends. And he always does this, or he almost always does this, especially with the leader of the opposition.
So why yesterday did the Prime Minister say that testing and tracing had very little or nothing to do with the spread or transmission of the disease?
Mr. Speaker, I hesitate to reprove the right honourable gentleman for a flaw he seems sometimes to fall into is not listening to my previous answer, Mr. Speaker. I gave a...
What answer? Boris, you didn't give an answer. You talked about going back to school. You talked about being able to lock down. You didn't talk about test and trace.
I gave a very, very clear answer. The answer is it is simply, and sadly, it is an epidemiological fact that transmission of the virus takes place by a human contact from person to person. What test and trace enables us to do is to isolate the cases of the virus with ever greater detail, which we weren't able to do before, Mr. Speaker. And thanks to the efforts of NHS test and trace, many thousands of people, trainees, nurses, doctors, young people, members of the armed services, we're not only testing more capacity, testing more than any other country in Europe, but capacity today is at a record high. And I think you should pay...
Which is also another interesting point that Boris Johnson is making. Now he's making comparisons with the European Union. When the comparisons were negative, when the results for the UK were negative, when it was a comparison, Boris Johnson was saying, no, you shouldn't be comparing with other countries. Now he's comparing with other countries. He's a charlatan. He's a crook. He's not honest.
Tribute to their work.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I listened to the answer that the Prime Minister gave to the questions. That's why I asked him the question, because yesterday he said the complete opposite of what he said today. Everybody who was in the chamber, everybody who reads Hansard will see it. And he talks about testing. Mr. Speaker, can I remind the Prime Minister that last week, before the Liaison Committee, he admitted testing currently has huge problems. Dido Harding said we plainly don't have enough testing capacity. The Health Secretary said fixing testing would take weeks. Pretending there isn't a problem is part of the problem, Prime Minister. It's unclear, and let's test what the Prime Minister's explanation is. Is the explanation for the problems that we haven't got enough capacity? It says which problem? The problem that he acknowledged 1 week ago before the Liaison Committee. Mr. Speaker,
of course, Boris Johnson won't acknowledge a problem in Parliament. He'll acknowledge a problem in a committee because he can't lie to the committee. He can lie in Parliament, but he can't lie in the committee because if he lies in the committee, there are consequences.
The explanation from the Prime Minister that we haven't got enough capacity because nobody could have expected the rise in demand, that's the Dido Harding defence. Or is it we've got all the capacity we need, it's just that people are being unreasonable in asking for tests? That's the Hancock defence. So which is it?
Mr. Speaker, I must say I think that the continual attacks by the opposition on Dido Harding in particular are...
Is Boris Johnson a white knight here defending Dido Harding? Dido Harding does not understand test and trace. I understand test and trace better than Dido Harding. Or Dido Harding is on purpose advising the public not to get tested. Which is it?
Are unseemly and unjustified. And I think that her teams have done an outstanding job in recruiting.
The question was not about Dido Harding. The question was about the defence that they're presenting. It's not about Dido Harding. It's about the defence that they have been presenting. And Matt Hancock as well. It's not a criticism of Matt Hancock. It's a criticism of the defence he's using, as in saying why we're not doing enough testing or why we're not tracing.
People from a standing start. This is not for a moment to deny the anxiety of those who want tests, which I readily accept. Of course, we would love to have much more testing instantly, and it is thanks to the efforts of NHS Test and Trace that we are not only at a record high today, testing more people than any other European country, but to get to the point that he raised, Mr. Speaker, we're going to go up to 500,000 tests by the end of October. That is
another promise by Boris Johnson, and probably by the time the end of October arrives, Boris Johnson will say, no, I didn't say that. I can guarantee it. Boris Johnson will make a promise on a Monday, and then on a Tuesday he will deny that promise. So you can forget about him keeping a promise by the end of October. It will be the same old mess, same old rhetoric. How dare you insult the hard-working people of NHS Test and Trace?
That is the work of Dido Harding and her team, and I think actually, again, what we want to hear, and what I frankly want to hear, is more of the spirit of togetherness that we had yesterday.
And there we have it. Okay, attack the messenger, ignore the question, ignore the point, and then ask for togetherness, ask for unity.
Mr. Speaker, because this is an opportunity to support NHS Test and Trace. This is an opportunity to get behind that scheme, to encourage people to believe in it and in its efficacy.
How can people believe in it if it's not working?
Instead, he constantly knocks it from the sidelines, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, I think the whip. I'll just say to the whip, there's a little bit of rowdiness coming from here, also from your good self, which I normally never have from you, and we're having a little bit from this side. I want to be able to hear the Prime Minister. When I can't hear the Prime Minister, I do worry about the people who are watching proceedings. If we have further comment, please do so. Speak to me afterwards. Right.
I miss order! Order!
Where are we up to? Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows my complaint is not with the NHS, it's with the government. My wife works for the NHS. My mother worked for the NHS. My sister works for the NHS. So I'm not going to take lectures from the Prime Minister on supporting the NHS.
This is a perfect response. I'm not going to take lectures about supporting the NHS. This is Boris Johnson's go-to message. How dare you insult the NHS? How dare you attempt to insult this sacrosanct entity, the NHS? It's not going to wash, Boris. It's not going to work on the likes of Keir Starmer.
The Prime Minister says we've got capacity, goes on and on about capacity. Let's test that. 3 weeks ago, millions of children went back to school. That's a good thing. Then the inevitable happened. Kids get coughs, bugs, flu. That's what happens. It's in the job description. But there's no effective system in place to deal with it. Many can't get tests quickly. Schools are allocated only 10 tests. Many wait days for the results. The outcome is obvious. Child and siblings off school, mum, dad or carer off work, and in some cases all year groups off school. How on earth did we get into this mess?
This is very interesting what Keir Starmer does. He lays out step by step, he lays out the problem, he lays out the consequences. Now, if Boris Johnson is incapable of responding to any of this, he just makes noise, which is quite frustrating to listen to.
Come on, Mr. Speaker. He knows perfectly well that, and he'll have read the advice from the 4 chief medical officers that there's an exceptionally small risk to children of primary and secondary school age from this disease. He knows.
But he's not talking about that. He's talking about kids going back into school and they will need tests because we don't know what they have. He's talking about kids going back into school, they have a sniffle, they have a cold, they sneeze. We don't know what that is. That's why it's necessary to test. Maybe it turns out that they're not infected with COVID. Maybe it turns out they're infected with something else. That's why it's important to test.
The children have a significantly lower rate of infection. That's all in the letter that they've published.
This is completely irrelevant.
Today, but he also knows that we are doing our level best to get every child a test who has symptoms, and further that thanks to the efforts of teachers in this country, of parents, pupils, 99.9% of our schools are now back.
Yes, you opened the schools again. That's an achievement for the government. Yes, look. We reopened the schools. Doesn't mean that the schools are safe. Doesn't mean that they have sufficient equipment. He's talking about sufficient tests available in schools for students. He's not talking about, oh look, the schools aren't open. Yes, the schools are open. That wasn't the point.
And in spite of all his attempts, I may say, throughout the summer, to sow doubt on the idea that schools were safe, the people of this country had more common sense, Mr. Speaker.
Once again, insult. I'm surprised Boris didn't say, and now join with me in defeating the virus as a team.
Keir Starmer.
Such a poor defence. That's such a poor defence. The point isn't whether the children have got COVID. It's that they've got COVID symptoms, and then they're off school. The government's own department shows that 1 in 8 children are off school this week. That disrupts their education. Whether it's COVID symptoms or other symptoms is nothing to the point. If the Prime Minister doesn't see that, he's really out of touch with families and what they're going through in schooling day in, day out in the last few weeks. The reality is, losing control of testing is a major reason why the Prime Minister is losing control of this virus. As a result, he's phasing in health measures, restrictions which we do support. But at the same time, he's phasing out economic support. Health measures and economic measures are now dangerously out of sync. Let me quote the Director General of the CBI. There can be no avoiding the crushing blow new measures will bring for thousands of firms. It's vital, she says, that all announcements of restrictions go hand in hand with clarity on the business support to protect jobs. Why wasn't that announced yesterday?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's be in absolutely no doubt that the work that this government has done to protect the economy of this country, to support the jobs of 12 million people through the furlough scheme, an overall expenditure of about £160 billion, has been unexampled anywhere else in the world. And I think he should pay tribute to the Chancellor and his work. And we will go forward with further creative...
Sorry, but it's not the Chancellor's money, okay? It's not your money that you're spending. It's the economy. It's the taxpayers' money. Is the furlough scheme a good idea? Yes. But Boris Johnson presents it as if it's his government invented it. It's been around for over a decade.
Creative and imaginative schemes to keep our economy moving. And that is the essence, Mr. Speaker, of the plan, of the proposals that he talks about. He supported them last night, or he supported them yesterday, Mr. Speaker. I hope he continues to support them. The essence of what we're saying, Mr. Speaker, is that we want to depress the virus, but keep pupils in school and keep our economy moving. And that is the single best thing we can do to support firms across the country.
Keir Starmer.
So, no mention of the furlough scheme.
Mr.
Apologies, no mention of extending the furlough scheme.
Speaker, I'm not asking about the support that was being put in place in the past. We support that. I'm asking about the support that's needed now, particularly in light of the restrictions announced yesterday. Mr. Speaker, this is not theoretical. Yesterday, 6,000 jobs were lost at Whitbread, one of the major employers in the hospitality sector. The CBI, the TUC and trade unions, the Federation of Small Businesses, the British Chamber of Commerce, the Governor of the Bank of England, they're all calling on the Prime Minister to stop and rethink. Support the businesses affected. Don't withdraw furlough. We've been saying it for months. When is the Prime Minister finally going to act?
Well, Mr. Speaker, these are indeed tough times, and I have no doubt that many businesses, many employees are feeling a great deal of anxiety and uncertainty, and we will do our level best to protect them throughout this period. But
we will do our level best. Okay, but we will do what? What are you willing to do? What are you going to do? How are you going to support these businesses? How are you going to support people on furlough?
we will get through this, Mr. Speaker, by precisely the methods that we have outlined and that were agreed upon in this House yesterday. And I may say, I think that the reality of the opposition position.
So Boris Johnson resorts to attacking the opposition once again. So Boris Johnson is not capable of actually answering questions. He's not capable of presenting a clear plan. His cabinet are incapable of presenting a clear plan, maybe with the odd exception. Boris Johnson's message is always the same. Attack the messenger, avoid the question, and then ask for cooperation. And it's quite sad and boring at this stage. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?